Human found the alien girl dying in a crash. Saving her meant breaking a treaty older than Earth. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to our main character. John Carter had always dreamed of exploring the vast unknowns of space. As a seasoned aerospace engineer for the United Earth Space Agency, he had spent years studying the stars, mapping out distant galaxies, and devising ways to keep Earth's people safe in the boundless vacuum of space. But nothing in his extensive training could have prepared him for what he found on that distant planet. It was a routine mission, or so it seemed. A survey of a newly discovered asteroid field far from the outer rim of the solar system. John was assigned to investigate the remnants of a destroyed vessel, presumed to be of alien origin. The last communication from the ship had been a distress signal, nothing more than static, with the occasional flicker of a strange, unidentifiable frequency. As John's spacecraft entered the atmosphere of the barren planet, the situation turned quickly from routine to life-altering. His heart pounded in his chest as his ship's sensors locked onto the wreckage of the craft. It wasn't just an alien ship, it was a graveyard of technology, shattered and mangled beyond recognition. Debris scattered across the desolate surface, the twisted metal gleaming under the faint light of a distant star. John's stomach twisted with unease as he landed his ship beside the wreckage. He had no idea what to expect, but his instincts told him something was wrong, terribly wrong. As he stepped out onto the cracked, dusty ground, he noticed something strange. Amidst the wreckage, a faint glow flickered in the distance. A faint, rhythmic pulse. At first, he thought it was a malfunction of his own equipment, but as he drew closer, he saw her. A young woman, her body crumpled against the broken remains of what was once her ship. She was unconscious, her chest rising and falling shallowly. The glow coming from her skin, a faint, shimmering silver blue. John knelt beside her, unsure of what to make of the scene before him. She looked so fragile, almost human but not quite. Her skin, pale as moonlight, her hair an unnatural shade of silvery white, and her features, sharp and alien, yet hauntingly beautiful. But it wasn't just her appearance that caught John's attention, it was the fact that she was still alive. Barely. Her breath was shallow, and blood stained the rocks beneath her. The weight of the situation crashed down on him. He knew that if he did nothing, she would die. But saving her wasn't just a matter of medical intervention. It would mean breaking a treaty. A treaty that had been signed long before the first human set foot on Earth. A treaty that had been in place to prevent exactly what John was contemplating, interference with alien species. The Galactic Pact, a centuries-old agreement between the various galactic civilizations, forbade humans from interacting with or even helping any non-human life form without approval from the Galactic Council. If he saved her, he would be violating that pact. And the consequences for such an action could be dire, not just for him, but for Earth itself. John stared at the fragile form before him, torn between his duty and the desperate need to save her life. His mind raced as he knelt beside the alien girl, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Her skin shimmered faintly, the silvery blue glow intensifying as her breath grew even shallower. He reached out, unsure, but instinctively placing his hand over her chest, trying to steady her breathing. There was no time to waste. Every second counted. If he didn't act now, she would die. But then, his thoughts turned to the treaty, to the Galactic Pact that governed all interactions between human civilization and alien species. Breaking the treaty wasn't just a minor infraction, it would have consequences that could ripple across the galaxy, possibly igniting a conflict that would reach all the way back to Earth. John knew that the Galactic Pact had been signed to prevent reckless actions, to protect the delicate balance between species. He had always respected the treaty, even though the idea of a human being bound by such laws felt alien to him. Now, standing over this young alien, those laws seemed far less important than the life of one individual. She was so close to death. Her silver blue eyes fluttered open, locking onto his with an intensity that took him by surprise. She said nothing, but the look in her eyes, deep, ancient, and full of pain, told him everything. She was not just any alien. She was a being from a civilization far older than Earth, a race of beings that had once traversed the stars long before humans even thought to look up. Her eyes held knowledge, wisdom, and sorrow that John could not even begin to comprehend. Please. The word was barely a whisper, but it was enough. John's heart tightened. He knew he had to help her. I'm not going to let you die, he whispered back, more to himself than to her. He looked around, quickly assessing his surroundings. The wreckage of her ship lay in scattered fragments, but there had to be something he could use, some piece of technology that might help stabilize her. As he rifled through the debris, he spotted a small compartment that looked like it might contain medical supplies. It was a gamble. He had no idea if the alien technology inside would be compatible with his own, but it was all he had. He reached in and pulled out a small device that looked like a cross between a medical scanner and a healing apparatus. The sleek surface hummed gently in his hand, almost as if it recognized the urgency of the situation. Without hesitation, he placed it on her chest. The device glowed brightly, its lights shifting from blue to green as it began to scan her vital signs. A series of beeps echoed through the quiet of the planet's surface, each one signaling that something was wrong. The girl's condition was worse than he had thought. Her body was failing, her organs shutting down from the trauma of the crash. If he didn't do something soon, the damage would be irreversible. The device emitted a soft pulse, and he could feel a slight warmth radiating from it as it began to stabilize her. But it wasn't enough. John's pulse quickened. He had to do more. His eyes darted back to the wreckage. There had to be something else he could use. But with each passing second, the reality of what he was doing set in. He was no longer just helping. A stranded traveler. He was breaking the most sacred law of the galaxy. The Galactic Pact was clear, no interference. No exceptions. And yet, here he was, defying everything he had ever been taught, everything humanity had ever agreed to. It was a decision that would change everything. It wasn't just about saving one life. It was about what came next. Would the galaxy punish him for this? Would Earth suffer for his actions? He didn't know, but he couldn't stand by and watch her die. Not when he had the power to save her. The device continued to pull softly against her chest as John watched, hoping it would be enough to stabilize her. But deep down, he knew it was just a temporary fix. The alien technology was advanced, but it wasn't designed to heal a human. And here he was, using it on a creature from a completely different civilization. He cursed under his breath, feeling the weight of his decision pressing harder against his chest. He had never been one to blindly follow rules, but this felt like it could be the beginning of something much bigger than he had anticipated. The sound of beeping came again, more insistent this time, and he looked down at the device. It was still working, but the readout was flashing red, indicating that her vital signs were still dangerously unstable. John felt his hands shake slightly as he looked at her again. She had been so still, so lifeless, but now there was a flicker of life behind her eyes. The soft glow from her skin faded to a dim, pulsing light, and for a moment, she seemed to be aware of him, of her surroundings. John swallowed hard, his heart racing. He had to do more. Without wasting another second, he moved quickly around the wreckage, searching for any other tools that could help. His mind raced with possibilities. There had to be something. Anything. As he turned over a piece of the broken hull, he found a small compartment buried beneath a layer of scorched metal. His heart skipped a beat when he opened it. Inside, wrapped in what appeared to be some sort of protective casing, was another device, larger than the first one, but similar in design. It looked like a medical scanner, but it had a set of unfamiliar markings etched across its surface. It was clearly alien. This, however, seemed like it had been designed for something much more serious. John didn't hesitate. He grabbed it and returned to the girl, placing the new device on her chest next to the smaller one. The machine hummed to life with a low, vibrating sound, and its lights blinked in a series of rapid patterns. The device appeared to be analyzing her body, scanning it from every angle. John watched the readouts with bated breath, his mind racing. He had no idea if this would work. No idea what kind of medical technology this was. But he had no choice. He had to try. The minutes dragged on like hours as the machine continued to scan her. The soft pulse of light from the devices illuminated the wreckage around them, casting long shadows on the cracked surface of the planet. John kept his focus, knowing that every second mattered. Then, just as his hope began to wane, the machine emitted a steady beep, and the lights turned green. A low hum filled the air, and John let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The girl's chest rose and fell more steadily now. Her breathing was deeper, more regular. John leaned back on his heels, staring at her in disbelief. The alien girl was alive. Against all odds, she was alive. But even as relief flooded through him, another thought hit him like a punch to the gut. He had saved her, but the cost would be high. The Galactic Pact had been clear, no interference. What if the galactic authorities found out? What if Earth itself was dragged into a conflict because of his decision? The risks were astronomical. He had violated a rule older than humanity itself, a rule that governed the very foundation of interstellar diplomacy. He could be branded a criminal, a rogue agent who put his own morality above the survival of his species. And yet, none of those fears seemed to matter in that moment. As he looked down at her, his mind made up. He would protect her. He would find a way to explain himself, to justify his actions. But for now, he had to focus on getting her out of here. They weren't safe on this planet. John knew they needed to leave before anyone else found them. The thought of facing the consequences of his actions was terrifying, but he couldn't go back. Not now. He reached out, gently taking her hand, trying to offer some reassurance. Her grip was weak, but it was enough to tell him she was aware, that she was fighting to survive. He wasn't sure what lay ahead for them, but one thing was clear, this was just the beginning. John knew that time was running out. The moment he saved her, the stakes had risen higher than he could have ever anticipated. The alien girl, whose name he still didn't know, was beginning to regain some of her strength. Her grip on his hand was now firmer, a subtle sign that she was fighting to stay alive, but he couldn't afford to wait much longer. The wreckage of her ship, scattered across the barren surface of the planet, was a reminder of the dangers that had brought her here. John glanced back at her, taking in the details of her strange, ethereal appearance. Her silvery blue skin, the faint glow that now flickered softly under her skin, and her delicate features that were somehow both human and distinctly alien. She was different, and yet, in that moment, she was just a person, someone in need of help. He couldn't turn his back on her. He helped her sit up slowly, supporting her fragile body as she winced, her eyes flickering with pain. She looked at him, still unable to speak, but her eyes conveyed more than words ever could. They were filled with gratitude, yes, but also with something deeper, something John couldn't quite place. Perhaps it was a shared understanding, an unspoken bond that crossed the boundaries of species. But there was also something else there, a hint of urgency. John felt it too. The feeling that they weren't alone, that they weren't safe. He stood up and began to pace around the wreckage, scanning the horizon for any signs of danger. His mind was racing, trying to piece together the fragments of this strange situation. He had broken a galactic law, violated the very foundation of the intergalactic treaties that governed all relationships between different species. The consequences could be catastrophic. What if the authorities found out? What if the Galactic Council sent a fleet to punish him for his actions? He knew they could be tracking the distress signal from the wreckage, and soon enough, someone would come to investigate. John's stomach twisted at the thought. He wasn't sure what would happen to Earth if they found out about his interference, but he knew it couldn't be good. He turned back to the girl, who had managed to stand with his help. She was weak, but she was holding herself up, her gaze now scanning their surroundings. There was no doubt in his mind, she was trying to assess the situation just as he was. He couldn't keep her here. They had to leave. But where would they go? He didn't have the resources to escape an entire galactic fleet, and his ship wasn't equipped for a high-speed chase across the stars. The only option was to reach a safe haven, a neutral planet where they could lay low until he figured out what to do next. John looked at the girl again, his mind made up. He couldn't leave her. He would protect her. But first, they had to get off this planet. He reached into the wreckage and began searching for any usable parts of her ship. The sooner they found a way to repair her vessel, the better. They couldn't afford to be found here, stranded in a dangerous part of the galaxy. As he worked, the girl's faint breathing became more regular, her color improving, though she was still very weak. John didn't know how long it would take to get her ship working again, but he knew they didn't have much time. He could hear the faint hum of his own ship's engines in the distance, but it wasn't enough to make him feel safe. They needed to get off this planet and into the vast reaches of space. He glanced back at her one last time, seeing the look of trust in her eyes, and felt a surge of determination. Whatever lay ahead, whatever consequences he would face for breaking the treaty, he couldn't abandon her now. Not when she was depending on him. John worked quickly, his hands moving over the scattered wreckage as his mind raced. The pieces of her ship lay in a disarray of twisted metal and charred fragments, but among the chaos, he began to find small sections that might be salvageable. He didn't know much about alien technology, but he could make out enough to recognize the parts he could repurpose. As he pried open a damaged compartment, he found a storage unit with a small holographic display. The screen flickered to life as he touched it, and a map of the galaxy appeared before him. It was marked with several locations, some familiar to him, others unknown. One of the markers stood out to him, a small, uncharted planet in a distant system. It was marked in a language he couldn't understand, but the symbols seemed important. That could be their way out, he thought. He didn't know what lay on that planet, but it was their best shot at finding safety. The girl was still standing, her body trembling slightly as she leaned against a piece of the wreckage. Her breathing had steadied, but she was clearly still weak, still recovering from the crash. John glanced at her, feeling a surge of guilt. He had to get her to safety, but first, he had to get her ship operational again. "Hey," he said softly, hoping his voice would carry some comfort. "I think I found a place we can go. It's not far, but we need to move fast." She turned to him, her silvery blue eyes meeting his. Though she couldn't speak, the look she gave him was one of trust, a silent understanding passing between them. She was ready. She didn't have to say anything for him to know that. He nodded, a grim determination settling over him. He couldn't afford to wait. John moved with purpose, scavenging parts from the wreckage and fitting them together with practiced precision. It wasn't long before he had pieced together enough to get the ship's core online. The systems flickered and hummed to life, lights flashing on the console. The girl had watched him work, her gaze never leaving him. Now, with the ship's systems back in operation, John hurriedly input the coordinates he'd found on the map, locking in the course. The ship was functional enough to get them off this planet, but it wouldn't hold up for long. They needed to get to that uncharted planet before anyone noticed their escape. As the engines roared to life, John felt a sense of relief flood over him. They were leaving this dangerous place, but it was only the beginning. He turned to the girl, his expression softening. "We're getting out of here," he told her, his voice steady. She didn't respond, but her eyes spoke volumes. She was grateful, but there was something else there, a hint of something more, something ancient and mysterious. Whatever her past was, whatever had brought her to this point, John knew that their journey was far from over. He took a deep breath and engaged the thrusters, watching the ground below them grow smaller as the ship lifted off the planet's surface. The stars stretched out before them, a vast sea of possibility. But John couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone, that someone, or something, was watching them. The thought gnawed at him as he steered the ship toward the unknown planet. The Galactic Pact still loomed over him, an ever-present reminder of the consequences of his actions. But for now, he was determined to focus on the road ahead, on keeping them both safe. He glanced back at the girl, her eyes now closed as she rested, and couldn't help but wonder what would come next. There was so much he didn't know, so much that was still hidden. But one thing was certain, whatever dangers lay ahead, they would face them together. The ship hummed steadily as it cut through the vast emptiness of space, the stars outside blinking like distant beacons in the endless black. John sat at the controls, his hands steady on the helm, but his mind was far from calm. He couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone, that somewhere out there, someone was watching them. The girl, still unconscious, lay in the seat next to him, her breathing slow and steady, but she had not yet regained full strength. Her silvery blue skin seemed to shimmer faintly under the soft lights of the cockpit, a quiet reminder of the alien world she came from. He couldn't stop thinking about the Galactic Pact, the ancient treaty he had just violated. By saving her, he had broken a law that had been in place for longer than humanity had even known about the stars. The thought of facing the consequences terrified him, but there was no turning back now. He had made his choice, and he had to live with it. The course was set, and in a few hours, they would reach the uncharted planet. John's eyes flicked to the navigation console, checking the coordinates once more. It wasn't a high-priority system, a place that wasn't even on most star maps, but it seemed like The only safe option. There would be no one looking for them there. Or so he hoped. A soft beep from the ship's communication system broke his thoughts, and he quickly glanced at the screen. It was a distress signal, faint but definitely a signal. John frowned and leaned closer, scanning the frequency. It wasn't from Earth, nor any civilization he recognized. His gut told him that something wasn't right. He checked the system's log, trying to trace the origin, but there was nothing. It was a blind signal. His hand hovered over the transmission button. He had a sinking feeling that if he responded, it could complicate everything, especially given their current situation. Still, he couldn't ignore it. There was a part of him that felt responsible for this galaxy now, a part that had been awakened by his actions with the girl. Before he could make up his mind, the transmission flickered off, vanishing into the static. The quiet returned, but the unease lingered. A low groan from the seat beside him caught his attention, and he turned to see the girl beginning to stir. Her eyelids fluttered as she regained consciousness, her silvery blue eyes slowly opening. She looked confused for a moment, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, but then her gaze met his. Her expression softened, and for the first time, she spoke, her voice faint but clear. Where are we?" Her words were like music, but John knew it was a language he couldn't fully understand. Yet, somehow, he could still grasp the meaning behind them. "We're heading to a safe place," John replied, his voice calm despite the storm of thoughts in his mind. "You're safe now." The girl looked at him, her expression shifting. She didn't speak again, but her gaze lingered on him, as if trying to read him, to understand him. John swallowed, feeling the weight of their situation pressing down on him again. There were too many unknowns. Too many things he didn't understand about her, about what had happened, and about what was coming next. But for now, all he could do was focus on getting them to safety. The girl closed her eyes again, seemingly content to rest for the moment. John allowed himself a brief sigh of relief before his thoughts turned back to the distress signal. He couldn't shake the feeling that it had been a warning. A warning of something coming, something that might change everything. He set his jaw, his resolve hardening. Whatever came next, he was ready to face it. They had no choice but to move forward, to keep going, and to protect her at all costs. He would deal with the consequences later. Right now, the only thing that mattered was getting to the uncharted planet, staying ahead of whatever was watching them, and keeping them both alive. The ship drifted quietly through the dark expanse of space, its engines humming steadily as John kept his hands firmly on the controls. The girl, still fragile and recovering, remained seated beside him, her silver blue skin glowing faintly in the soft light of the cockpit. Her eyes, though not yet fully alert, seemed to flicker with an ancient wisdom, as though she understood the enormity of the situation better than John ever could. The uncharted planet was drawing closer, and with it, the uncertain future that lay ahead. John's thoughts were a mix of anticipation and anxiety. The distress signal earlier had left him unsettled. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed, or worse, watched. Whoever or whatever had sent that transmission might have been a warning, or worse, an invitation for danger. As he glanced at the readouts on the console, the navigation system blinked steadily, showing their approach to the unknown planet. He had no idea what awaited them there, whether it would be a safe haven or another trap. The girl stirred beside him, her eyes now fully open. She looked at him for a moment, silent as if searching for something in his face, before speaking in a voice that was still weak but clearer than before. "What is this place?" Her accent was strange, unlike any language John had encountered. Yet, he understood her, as though the meaning of her words was somehow ingrained in him. "It's a safe place," he said softly, trying to reassure her, though his own nerves were on edge. "We'll be all right here." She studied him for a moment longer before nodding slightly, her gaze shifting toward the view outside. John could sense the weight of the silence between them, the unspoken questions that hung in the air. Who was she? Where did she come from? And most importantly, what would happen once they landed? He glanced again at the monitor, noting that the planet's surface was coming into view. The world was a muted shade of green and brown, with large oceans covering much of the surface. There were no signs of civilization, no cities, no satellites. Just the natural world, untouched and wild. A strange sense of relief washed over him. This might be their chance to lie low, to disappear from the prying eyes of the galaxy. But that relief was short-lived. The moment the planet loomed closer, a series of alarms went off on the ship. A red light flashed on the dashboard, and a warning popped up on the navigation screen. Warning, unknown ship detected in proximity. John's heart skipped a beat. He quickly checked the radar. Sure enough, a small vessel was following them, a blip moving steadily toward their course. The girl tensed beside him, sensing the danger, her eyes narrowing as she looked out the window. "They found us," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engines. John's hand hovered over the controls, his mind racing. He had no time to waste. He needed to shake them off before they reached the planet, before they were trapped. The ship was not equipped for combat, not against a vessel that seemed to be actively pursuing them. But he couldn't just let them catch up. His fingers danced over the console, quickly engaging evasive maneuvers, trying to put as much distance between them and the unknown ship as possible. The ship jolted as it responded, accelerating and banking sharply to the left. The unfamiliar vessel mirrored his moves, keeping pace with them. John's heart raced as the seconds stretched on, each movement of the pursuer tightening the knot in his stomach. Whoever was in that ship wasn't giving up. The girl beside him didn't speak again, but John could feel her presence like a weight in the room. She was waiting, watching, as though she too knew the stakes. He pushed the ship harder, ignoring the strain on the engines. The planet was so close now, he just needed a few more moments, just enough time to lose their pursuer. His eyes flicked to the girl again. "Get ready," he said quietly. She didn't respond, but he saw her grip tighten on the armrest beside her. They were both prepared for whatever came next. The distance between them and the unknown ship was closing rapidly. John knew they couldn't outrun it forever, but he had one more move left. With a quick glance at the navigation console, he plotted a course that would lead them into the planet's atmosphere. The moment they hit the atmosphere, they would have the cover of the thick clouds and turbulence. It was risky, but it was their only shot. "Hold on," he muttered to the girl. He slammed the throttle forward, pushing the ship into a dive toward the planet's surface. The ship tore through the atmosphere, shuddering under the strain as the planet's thick clouds enveloped them. The turbulence was violent, and the ship's hull groaned under the pressure, but John kept the throttle pushed forward, knowing this was their only chance. The ship screamed through the air, its engines straining as they plummeted toward the surface below. The pursuit ship followed, as expected, but John could feel the atmosphere shift, the heavy clouds offering them a brief moment of cover. The girl beside him gripped the armrest, her eyes wide but focused. She wasn't panicking, but John could see the tension in her every muscle, her awareness of the danger sharp and instinctive. He glanced at the navigation screen, seeing the terrain below rapidly approaching. They were heading for a dense forest area, a vast stretch of uncharted land. It wasn't ideal, there were no clear landing zones, but it was their best shot. If they could make it through the atmosphere and land without being spotted, they might stand a chance of hiding. His hands were steady on the controls, guiding the ship through the chaos of the storm. Lightning crackled outside, illuminating the ship for a brief moment, casting harsh shadows inside the cockpit. The pursuing vessel had started to gain on them, its powerful engines pushing it closer, but John wasn't about to give up. He pulled the ship into a sharp turn, narrowly avoiding a mountain range that loomed ahead. The ship banked hard, the force pressing John and the girl against their seats. The girl didn't flinch, instead, she seemed to brace herself for the next maneuver, anticipating his every move. Her composure gave him the strength to keep going. As the ship continued its descent, the storm grew even more violent. The rain hammered against the hull, and the wind howled through the cockpit. John's eyes flicked to the control panel. Checking the systems. They were holding together, but just barely. The ship's outer shields were weakening under the pressure, and the turbulence was only growing worse. He had to land soon. Below them, the forest was a blur of greens and browns, a sprawling expanse of trees and wild terrain. There was no time to find a clear area. John had to make the decision now. The ship was coming in too fast, and he could hear the engines of the pursuing ship behind them, closing in quickly. With a deep breath, John made his choice. He aimed for a small clearing in the forest, just ahead. It was tight, but it was the best option they had. "Hold on," he said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. He slammed the throttle into reverse, fighting the gravity pulling them down, trying to slow the descent just enough to land. The ship groaned as it tried to adjust, the controls locking into place as they neared the ground. With a sudden jolt, the ship made contact with the earth. The impact rattled through their bodies, and John winced, bracing for the crash. The ship skidded along the ground, its underside scraping against the earth, before finally coming to a jolting stop. The entire ship shuddered, and for a moment, there was silence. John's heart pounded in his chest, and he took a deep breath, grateful they had made it. The girl beside him was quiet for a moment, her face pale but unscathed. She turned to him, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that spoke volumes. She didn't need to say anything. She knew exactly what they were up against now. They had made it to the surface, but they were not safe. Not yet. The pursuing ship was still out there, and they were in a dense, unknown forest with no clear path ahead. But they had time, just enough to think, to regroup, and to plan their next move. John looked out at the storm raging outside, then back at the girl. This was far from over, but for the first time since the crash, he felt a small flicker of hope. They had survived the worst of it. Now, they just needed to survive what came next. The ship lay still in the forest, the engines quiet now, the storm still howling outside. John sat in the cockpit, his hands gripping the controls, his mind racing. They had landed, but it had been rough, too rough, and they were far from safe. The forest around them was dense, the trees towering high, their trunks thick and gnarled. The rain had slowed, but the wind was still fierce, whipping through the branches and sending sheets of water cascading through the leaves. The ship had come to a grinding halt after the hard landing, the metal creaking under the strain. John could feel the pressure in his chest, the weight of what had just happened. They had escaped the immediate threat, but the pursuit was far from over. His eyes flicked to the console. The readings were all normal, but the ship had sustained some damage. The outer hull was intact, but he knew it wouldn't be able to withstand another hit. Not that they could afford to stay here for long. The pursuing ship would be on them soon enough, and they couldn't risk being trapped. He turned to look at the girl beside him. She was still seated, her eyes closed, though he could see the faintest tremor in her hands. She had been quiet since they landed, but John could feel the weight of her thoughts, her presence like a constant hum in the air. She was adjusting, processing, but she knew what was at stake. She had to. He knew they couldn't stay here for long, not if they wanted to survive. But where could they go? The forest was vast, and they had no idea what was lurking in its depths. For all he knew, there could be creatures here they didn't want to meet. Still, it was their best shot. They had to move, and they had to move fast. John unstrapped himself from the seat and rose, his body stiff from the tense moments of the crash. He checked his equipment quickly, his communicator, the emergency rations, the survival kit. Everything was in place. He moved to the back of the ship, pulling out a small handheld scanner to assess their surroundings. The dense trees, the thick undergrowth, it was perfect for hiding, but it was also dangerous. They needed to get their bearings and find a safe route before they were discovered. As he walked toward the rear hatch, he looked back at the girl. She hadn't moved. Her eyes were still closed, but he knew she was aware of everything around her. She wasn't asleep, not really. She was just resting, recovering from the strain of the crash. He needed to focus on the task at hand, but it wasn't easy. There was a part of him that wanted to stay, to make sure she was okay, but he couldn't afford to let his guard down. The moment they stepped out of the ship, they would be exposed. He had no idea how much time they had before the pursuing ship arrived, but he knew it couldn't be long. He checked the scanner again, the map of the area lighting up with a few markers. The forest was vast, but there was a narrow path up ahead, a way through the trees that might lead them toward higher ground. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He turned back to the girl. "We need to go," he said softly, his voice steady but firm. She looked at him then, her eyes meeting his with a quiet understanding. She didn't need to speak. She was ready. John reached for the hatch and opened it, the cold air rushing in. The sound of the storm was deafening now, the rain battering against the leaves and the wind howling through the trees. He glanced back at her once more. She was steady, her gaze fixed on the forest ahead, and together, they stepped out into the unknown.